Thank you. All right, so I am told that Rebecca Greenspan is now able to join us digitally, and I'm hoping that she's going to appear on the screen at any moment. Rebecca is the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development.
Hello.
And hello, hi. This is Henry Kerr, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you perfectly well.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really glad you were able to overcome the traffic that I understand you were caught up in.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's no problem at all.
Apologies for the delay. Thank you for your flexibility.
Absolutely. Well, we're delighted to have you with us. So the theme for our discussion is advancing global trade in the new normal. And we've already discussed a little bit this morning how the new normal appears to keep changing. You know, a few weeks ago, we might have thought that that was a question primarily about the world after the pandemic. Now we have the additional shock caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and additionally we're looking at the prospect of the spread of COVID in China interfering again with supply chains even 2 years into the pandemic. So how do you view the landscape at the moment in terms of the challenges for trade after year, it seems, of black swan events or real shocks to the global trading system?
Yeah, thank you, Henry. Yes, we are worried because the outlook for the world trade and the world economy is worsening, yes, and we are seeing huge disruptions in three areas of trade that are very important and that have a huge impact, especially on the developing countries, but in the whole economy. Is the 3F. Yes, we are seeing huge disruptions in food, in fuel, and in finance. And this is really affecting the prospects of recovery from COVID, and also in terms of the economic outlook of the world economy, and especially, as I said, of the developing countries. You know, we are seeing rising inflation, high volatility, and widening deficits in many parts of the world. Deficits in the external account and deficits also in terms of the fiscal space of the economies.
Do you see that issue of fiscal space as being one that has really divided countries during the pandemic? Economic policy has been really different across countries in response to COVID-19, owing to that matter of affordability and government debt. And now, as you mentioned, we've got these additional shocks that countries are having to think about all over again. You know, what are the emergency policies they can implement to help their public through this time? In the rich world, I suppose you might say, people are worried a lot about inflation, so maybe they don't want the deficit to go up so much. In the poor world, you know, they didn't do big COVID stimulus to begin with. So how should you think now about what economic policies are needed in this fiscally constrained world that we suddenly find ourselves in?
Yes, it's very important what you're saying, Henry. First of all, you know, developed countries, and especially those that have reserve currency, were able to have packages, fiscal and monetary packages that are around 25–30% of their GDP, yes, while in the middle income countries it was 7%, and in the low income countries it was 2% of GDP. So we can see the big gaps that were in terms of the packages and the stimulus packages that countries had available to really face the challenge of COVID. And now with the disruption, with the additional disruption because of the war in Ukraine and the food, fuel, and finance problems, this is getting deeper. Let's remember, Henry, that a household's income is devoted mainly to food, and in a second tier to fuel, just to energy. And so they will be very affected by what is happening now, but the skyrocketing prices in wheat, for example, and other cereals and other food staples. So we are worried about that. And as you say, if the developing countries or the poor countries don't have the fiscal space to really be able to tackle this very important impact on the household well-being, we will see a correlation between unrest and the present conditions in the world. We saw this already, you know, with food prices going up in 2008, 2009, if you remember. And I think that it's very important that the international community will be aware of this, so we can put together a package that will support these countries in terms of their fiscal needs, but also in terms of the debt burden that they are facing with the mounting crisis, COVID crisis, and present crisis.
Let's talk specifically about food, because even if you're able to overcome those constraints in terms of your budget, it's still the case that there's going to be massive disruption to wheat supply. I believe I'm right in saying that it's nearly a third of global wheat supply comes from Russia and Ukraine. So what can the world do about that? Is it about finding substitutes? Is it about rerouting trade? Do you have an idea what is necessary to deal with the food shortage specifically?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, because you know that fertilizers are also going up, Henry, and that will also affect the food production inside the countries at the national level, not only in terms of trade. So these are two combined effects that are very difficult to overcome in the short term, because you haven't planned for this. So many of the countries will use their inventories, but in the low-income countries, inventories are very low. Yes, so in the developed countries, you know, the inventories will help, you know, curve a little bit the price hikes, but in the low-income countries, that would be very difficult. So in a way, what we have to control is the other aspects of the cost problem. Yes, for example, in terms of transport, we are seeing also a very an inflation on the cost of transport for trade in the world. So in the panel that we just saw, you were talking about digitalization, yes, of the ports, of the customs. All that is things that we can do to really try to maintain under control the other costs of the trade in food and in the other products too. But it's very difficult to increase production in the very short term. Yes, that you have the constraint of the production function itself.
So there's obviously these set of enormous short-run challenges that the world must deal with now. But there's also the question of how these events fit into the long-run picture for global trade. It had already been the case that we'd seen essentially an end to multilateral trade negotiations or no real progress, and a movement towards regional trade agreements instead. And now there's increasing worries that the world is going to polarize more, become more divided in terms of trade flows. Where do you see global trade patterns going in the longer term?
Yes, I think that we are seeing several trends here. First of all, we are seeing a trend for regionalization. Yes, intra-regional trade is becoming more important. Second, we are seeing a shortening of the global value chains. Yes, a shortening and a diversification in terms of the global value chains. And I think that those trends are also influencing what we call the nearshoring and the reshoring of trade. So there are regions that can benefit from this, and developing regions that can benefit from this regionalization if we go for big regions like, for example, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that could be very important in this trend, or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in the Asia Pacific, that is the largest trade a group that we find right now. So we will see that trend strengthening towards time. And we have seen in the pandemic that regional trade was more resilient towards the crisis than global trade. So if regions will start, to converge, so we won't see such a polarization as you are putting it, yes? But if regions start to get apart, so we will see, as you say, a disruption in trade because the global norms won't be there to protect everybody. So you will have, the consolidation of groups instead of the advancement of the norms and standards and rules at the global level. But we are not sure which of these ones we are going to see, yes? So in a way, it's better to go by regions than go by countries, yes? Because if we will go by countries, the spaghetti ball will be even more difficult to manage, yes? So in that sense, we are supporting regions to converge in norms of origin, in standards, in rules. And if we can work towards that convergence, so it's not the first best, it's not the global multilateral norms, but at least will give us a more orderly trade picture than one where each country will go its way. So my view in terms of regionalization is not so pessimistic. I think that convergence is possible and that certain frameworks and order within the regions is possible.
You mentioned resilience there, the resilience of supply chains, and it's something that many businesses now are increasingly concerned with, is making sure that their supply chains are robust to shocks in light of what we've seen over the past few years. But you're an economist. When we think about the vision for free trading as it used to be, it wasn't that you had a million different suppliers. It was about specialization, and that specialization of individual countries is what makes everybody rich. So how should we think about that trade-off between resilience and efficiency, and how willing should we be to give up some gains from trade in order to ensure that the supply chain, it can't be taken down overnight by these shocks?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I think that we will see a combination of efficiency and diversification. And, given the reality of the shocks, you cannot bet on one supplier that is completely specialized on one country. You will see diversification as part of the maximization effort of companies. And we heard that in the former panel that you were moderating, yes, that diversification will be part of the game towards the future. Now, diversification can help many countries and in a way can boost trade also from different regions of the world. So as we were saying, the nearshoring will help many developing countries really to enter the world trade arena in better conditions with more investment and more technology to be able to participate in a smarter way. So what we have to do is to support those countries, to have the rules, the investment facilitation, the trade facilitation that will be needed for the nearshoring to really to impact positively their economies. So the diversification trend can be an opportunity for many of the countries in the developing world really to enter the trade in better conditions than before.
Another thing a lot of people tell me is an area of real opportunity is services trade in light of all the digitization that's taken place. How optimistic are you for the future of services trade and services integration? Because it's an area where the non-tariff barriers to trade, those cross-border regulations, are much sort of harder to bring down than just in the old world where you had to cut tariffs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have a problem there, Henry, because we don't have the data. Yes, the data on trade in services and in e-commerce and e-trade is very bad. So there has to be a collective effort in terms of understanding better what is it that we have at hand. Now, obviously, e-trade and e-commerce and service trade is very important for many of the countries, especially for middle-income countries. This is a major source of opportunities for the future, yes. But in a way, we don't know what are the regulations that we need, or the standards or the norms, because we don't have the data. So I think that there is a challenge there for the organizations and for the collective intelligence, let's put it that way, of the world in terms of the effort that we have to do to have better data for being able to understand better how e-commerce will evolve in terms of the negotiations. Now, on the other hand, for services, trade facilitation and the trade facilitation agreement is very important. The problem is the capacity of the countries to really be able to have, get to the standards and the norms that have been set for services. We need to make a lot of support for capacity building in the country so they can take advantage of these opportunities. But I am optimistic with respect to e-commerce, e-trade, and services, but we need to have a better framework and understanding. So the effort that we can do collectively on this area it can be very important.
Now, we've had a question on a topic that we've touched on already, but I'm keen for the audience to be able to have their say here. Someone's written, COVID-19 drove supply chain disruptions and demonstrated strong dependencies on a limited number of countries for a limited number of products, giving the example of rare earths from China, semiconductors from Taiwan, and now gas from Russia. If global supply chain management becomes the new theatre for geopolitical tensions, what effects can we expect on trade and trade regulation? We've come full circle a little bit here, given our discussion at the beginning, but what do you think the role is of governments and regulators? What should we be looking to them for in this new landscape?
Well, I hope that we won't see at present what we saw with the vaccine and COVID happening on trade. Yes, that we saw protectionism, unilateral measures, taking over the trade, the trade space. I hope that this time, with the disruption of trade, we will see more multilateral responses to the problems that we are facing. The economists have called, I talked about reshoring and nearshoring, and the economists in one of the articles talk about friendshoring in this geopolitical world. Probably we will see that too. Yeah, geopolitics also, not only efficiency in business, being one of the variables that investors and firms will have to take into account for diversification. Geopolitics is right now taking over. Yes, it is taking over in terms of technology, it's taking over in terms of cooperation, it's taking over in terms of trade. And this is a variable that we will have to look, very carefully how it develops across times. But it's true, I agree with the economists in the sense that friendshoring will be part of the mix that we will see in the future.
Well, I'm always happy to hear an endorsement of the economist's views. Rebecca, we are out of time, I'm afraid. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us today. And please join me now in thanking Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Henry.